In this fifth module, our final module of ethical practice through evidence-based and culturally responsive disability evaluations, clinicians, supervisors, administrators, and researchers as agents of change. You're going to hear from supervisors and administrators and professional development providers, Diane Katakowski, Jennifer Ryan, and Dr. Stephanie Downey Toledo.
Hello, my name is Dr. Stephanie Downey Toledo, and I am a bilingual speech pathologist. However, currently I am working as a superintendent in an urban district in Rhode Island. And so today, connected to this conversation about disability evaluation, I want to talk a little bit about my journey to this point and the various ways that I've worked to improve disability evaluation and overall support for students identified with a disability, because we know so many of those who are identified do not actually have a disability. And I want to emphasize that journey because I deeply believe it takes all of us working from all parts of the system. So I started as a classroom teacher and felt very frustrated by the disability evaluations that were happening and knew that they were not being done ethically, and that pretty much every kid who was multilingual was being assumed to be having a disability. And while I wish I could say that that practice was totally gone all these decades later, we know that it's still the case. So from being a classroom teacher, I thought, oh, if I could be the one doing the evaluation, that'll solve all the problems. And so I became a bilingual SLP. And so I went from our second largest school district in the country, Los Angeles Unified, to our first largest district in the country, New York City. And so have always worked in very large urban systems. And so tried to approach the problem from the bilingual speech pathologist and evaluator angle. And that was powerful too, just as we was being a classroom teacher. But I really found that there were certain things that I was noticing at the system level that needed to be addressed so that everyone else in the system could optimally play their part, whether it was the classroom teacher or the evaluator or the therapist and everyone else supporting each of our students. So there was certainly a through line from being a teacher, being a speech pathologist, and now being a system leader as the superintendent. And that through line was a commitment to students in traditional public schools, in urban contexts, with a focus on supporting students who are too often misidentified and misunderstood. And so I'm so grateful that I get to work alongside incredible, committed equity warriors and see how we together can make the changes, because it's not going to happen with just one of us. And so I'm so grateful while I don't hold the role currently of classroom teacher or currently of bilingual SLP, I work very closely with all of those people, because to truly get to the place of culturally responsive and ethical evaluation, it's going to take all of us. So I want to talk just for a few minutes about the approach I take as a system leader. It's really threefold, and I share this with my team, that every day, every week, every school year, we need to be doing these three strategies in big ways and small ways. We need to continuously be developing our team, the talent that supports kids directly. We need to build systems. There's a great quote by James Clear: we don't rise to our goals, we fall to the level of our systems. And so you can have the greatest aspiration, but if we don't build the systems to support those goals and aspirations, it ultimately falls down. And then the third is to always be raising expectations. So circling back to that first one, what does it mean to provide ongoing talent development? You've heard some of my colleagues in this video talk about how people really tend to rely on the assessments that they learned when they were in grad school, regardless of how many years or decades have gone by, and that they just continue to purchase that next update to whatever that go-to was. And that really would not fall into best practice. And so we make a really intentional effort to ensure that across every role in our system, teachers, related service providers, psychologists, everyone, teaching assistants are getting meaningful learning experiences to support them as professionals, and always ensuring that it's paired with ongoing embedded coaching and support, so that when that speech pathologist goes to do an evaluation, there is someone there to support the implementation of those new practices or of that new assessment. Then that second big goal of building systems. What I mean by this is systems of support, systems of accountability, so that there is data driving our actions and we all feel accountable to shared goals for kids, and systems of collaboration. How are we ensuring that evaluators have time to talk to each other and perhaps do some norming on, oh, should we do some checks and see, are we actually seeing the same things? Or, oh, do you have this background as a multilingual evaluator, and you could help me to better understand the ways to use or not use different assessments? And so we really ensure that there is feedback, feedback on your own practice, feedback on the data connected to your actions. How many referrals have you made? How many of the students that you evaluated, are there trends that the students you evaluate always end up with a certain type of program recommendation? Or are you evaluating and no one's getting an IEP? We need to look at those patterns so that as a system leader, I can work with you to reflect on if you've started to default into certain assumptions, or if you're still looking at each child as the individual that they are, and certainly what that I in IEP represents. And then the third big way that I approach systems leadership and continuous improvement of not just our disability evaluations, but of everything in our system on behalf of kids, is to raise expectations. And, we talk about this for adults and kids, and that growth mindset that everyone's always improving. But really, when we think about disability evaluation, for me, you can't talk about that without also talking about what's happening in the classrooms. What are the multi-tiered systems of support? So when I see a trend where a certain teacher has referred multiple kids in a given school year, I want to know what's going on in that classroom. What does the tier 1 look like? What instruction is happening? And should we even be talking about disability evaluation if the child hasn't had a solid evidence-based tier 1 program? So looking at what happens through MTSS, also, we need to raise expectations of both the evaluator and the evaluations being used. What are the tools and resources beyond just the go-to assessments that are standardized? And so making sure that we are not just feeling pressed for time and so defaulting to what might be quicker, but in every case, in every evaluation, taking the time to do what we know is ethical and what is best for kids. And then, of course, raising expectations of the IEP development and review, so that even once that evaluation has happened, that actually drives the discussion and the decisions and the program recommendations, so that everyone doesn't end up with that same cookie cutter 2 times 30 in a group recommendation that we know is by far the most common. So again, developing talent, building systems, and raising expectations as the system leader is one of the ways that I ensure that my therapists and evaluators and teachers are set up for success to do the great work that they do to ensure ethical evaluation and treatment so that our students can thrive and we can minimize the impact of the disability and maximize their opportunities to learn. Thank you, and wishing you all the best in your practice.
Greetings from Oakland Schools, an intermediate school district serving almost 175,000 students in Michigan. My name is Diane Katakowski, and I am here with my colleague, Jennifer Ryan. We are both speech language pathologists who serve as consultants for over 400 incredible school SLPs employed in our local districts. We are excited to share with you our professional learning and capacity building model for high quality speech and language evaluations. Our professional learning content is grounded in the roles and responsibilities of school SLPs, using systems of support as part of prevention and referral procedures, grounding eligibility decision-making in IDEA's 3-question litmus test. Jen's going to talk about that in just a little bit. And providing specially designed instruction that is educationally relevant and ensures learning acceleration. In addition to our vision, Jen and I use data to inform our professional learning content and framework. And based on our state's public data platform, which is called myschooldata.org, you can see that in our county, specific learning disability, speech language impairment, and autism are very commonly identified as the primary disability for students with IEPs. In the year shown here, these three areas represented 65% of all IEPs in the county. Given these three areas of eligibility alone, as well as eligibility areas that involve underlying or co-occurring communication delay, SLPs are working as primary interventionist and case coordinator for at least 25 to 65% of students with IEPs in Oakland County. So the bottom line is SLPs work with the majority of students with IEPs in any district in our county. SLPs are change agents that can work across the entire educational system to improve outcomes when it comes to eligibility, decision-making, and high-quality evaluations. Now, another data source that compels our professional learning around high-quality evaluations is our IEP identification patterns for English learners. Anyone performing evaluations of English learners and doing it well understands that the key to validly, reliably teasing out difference from disorder from gap is to let go of our grasp on static, one-shot, culturally biased assessment practices and incorporate dynamic assessment practices that honor a child's learning context and lived experience. In Oakland County, we have worked really hard across the past 10 years or so to incorporate dynamic assessment practices in order to decrease over and under identification of English learners. As of this past school year, about 50% of our local districts are identifying English learners and monolingual English speakers as needing IEPs at about the same rate. That's exactly what we want. We have about 20% of our locals who are under identifying our English learners, and we have about 30% of our schools that are over identifying. So we still have work to do. And finally, our local stakeholder data confirms what Dr. Crowley shared. Long-standing evaluation problems persist. Over-reliance on norm-referenced static tests, lack of dynamic assessments, duplication of testing areas, and lack of integration of results compelled Jen and I to change our model for professional learning and capacity building. So we rely on the work of Joyce and Showers around the learning pyramid, and we see that at most, passive teaching methods lead to retention of really no more than about 30% of the learning content, whereas participatory teaching methods that focus on discussion, practice, coaching, they can lead to retention of up to 90% of the content. And since our school SLPs really have no time to waste, Jen and I have created a framework for implementation that builds knowledge and skills as well as intentionally builds transfer to everyday application so that our SLPs can work smarter and not harder when they engage in their evaluation practices. Our professional learning framework uses a tiered system of support for SLPs that begins with foundational, common, shared learning for all. Foundational learning content really stays relatively similar every academic year because it's designed to cover the broad range of workload roles and responsibilities common to school SLPs. For SLPs looking for support with implementation of that foundational learning, we offer more intensive implementation support sessions across the year. These sessions are hour-long, virtual, and they're tailored to a specific foundational learning content. They involve connecting SLPs across the county who share a similar passion or a priority for applying what they learned to their daily routine. Now, not all SLPs who participate in foundational learning want or need implementation support, but these are available for the some SLPs who do want practice and discussion with their peers. And then finally, we offer some coaching and technical assistance for very few people who need the most intensive support or practice. But what we have found when it comes to evaluation practices, our implementation support sessions have been really instrumental in getting SLPs to hone their practice, incorporate dynamic practices, and live into more culturally responsive ethical assessment practices. Our tiered model, especially around evaluations, allows us to help build the capacity of our SLPs so that they have the knowledge, skills, and confidence to practice at the top of their license. And now Jen's going to spend the rest of our time highlighting our capacity building model.
Great, thanks, Diane. As Diane mentioned, our foundational learning lays the groundwork for realizing our vision to empower SLPs to use their clinical informed judgment and expertise in their evidence-based practice. The professional learning session that we wanted to highlight is our foundational learning called Evaluation of SLI. In this half-day session that we offer each year, SLPs explore evidence-based practice around evaluation, but also the legal requirements outlined through IDEA and our Michigan special education rules and regulations. And all of these requirements and best practice recommendations are grounded in our ASHA Code of Ethics. In this professional learning experience, we provide tools that help SLPs engage in ethical evaluation practices that not only comply with state and federal guidelines, but also maintain positive relationships with families and education partners. SLPs who attend this session share that the tools and the key concepts we explore empower them to use their clinical judgment to make SLI eligibility decisions and to communicate those decisions clearly. There are three key concepts for change that this foundational learning aims to investigate. The first is what we call the 3QLT, or the 3-question litmus test. These are the 3 questions that require a yes answer in order to find a child eligible for special education under IDEA. Is there a disability? Does the disability impact performance in or access to general education? And does the student require specially designed instruction? In our foundational learning, we explored not only these 3 questions, but a heuristic or tool that supports SLPs as they use evidence-based assessment practices to make those decisions. The second key concept for change that we explore in this professional learning session is the use of dynamic assessment and a shift away from static, culturally biased assessment practices. It's a focus on these 2 key concepts, the 3-question litmus test and dynamic assessment, that SLPs report leads them to the 3rd key concept for change, and that is feeling empowered to use their informed clinical opinion. But informed clinical opinion doesn't develop overnight, and neither does a feeling of being empowered to use it. No one leaves their clinical fellowship year with loads of informed clinical opinion. And similarly, if we have relied on norm reference standardized tests to make all eligibility decisions till now, trusting your clinical opinion can be tentative at first. So we have found that a few things support that growth. First are those decision-making heuristics like the 3-question litmus test. We've also found that practicing elevator speeches or other scripts about culturally responsive dynamic practices can be helpful. And finally, examples of evaluation plans or reports that clearly illustrate these practices, these dynamic practices, can make the new ideas come together more clearly. But foundational learning opportunities are often not sufficient for system-wide change. And for that reason, we offer implementation supports across the topics of our foundational content, including SLI eligibility and evaluation practices. We know that applying new innovation requires incremental progress over time and empowerment that the change is possible. One tool we use to support SLPs as they innovate their own clinical practice is an implementation progress map or an innovation configuration. With this tool, SLPs define their steps along the way to full application of new practice. You can see in this example that the end goal of fully incorporating dynamic assessment in SLI evaluations is broken down into the actionable steps it will take to get there. It is by honoring these small steps and reflecting on our practice regularly that we're able to make real change. We hope that it's been helpful for you to consider the aspects of our professional learning continuum that support SLPs as they grow in their use of evidence-based practice. Thank you so much for your time. Feel free to email us with any questions or comments.